I spent 38 years in this house, but one signature turned me into a guest in my own life. The deed transfer sat quietly inside a brown leather folder, tucked between old notebooks he never let me touch. A red seal stamped across the words, Living Trust, held his sister's name. Mine was nowhere. My throat thickened like smoke. I couldn't draw in air. It felt like the house stopped recognizing my breath. I stood in the kitchen as if the floor forgot I had weight. Have you ever wondered if a will in the drawer could be worthless? This is elder financial abuse. Lorraine Mayfield had lived in the same modest house on County Road 110 near Rolla, Missouri for nearly 4 decades. It was a one-story home with worn wood siding and ivy curling up the front porch. She and her husband, Calvin, had moved there in 1986 when interest rates were high. Money was tight, but they were full of hope. Calvin had been a civil engineer, quiet and meticulous. Lorraine was a small-town librarian. She had loved the silence between bookcases, the scent of old pages, the rhythm of scanning barcodes, and recommending large print novels to women her age. They had no children. By choice, they used to say. In truth, there had been 2 miscarriages and years of quiet after. In their retirement, Calvin spent hours in his office behind a closed door. Lorraine spent time in the garden. She kept the pantry labeled, the laundry folded, the house warm in winter. They had a routine that spoke more of time than affection, but she trusted it. She trusted him. There were no raised voices, no long absences, no signs of disaster, only quiet. One spring afternoon, a young cousin from out of state visited. He was learning about property taxes and online systems. Over iced tea, he asked casually, "Aunt Lorraine, why doesn't your name show up on the county title search?" She laughed. "Oh, it must be outdated. I'm sure it's just in Calvin's name from way back." That night, she lay awake for hours. Calvin had always managed the paperwork. She remembered asking once, years ago, if they should add her name to the deed. He had smiled and said, "It's all ours. Lorraine, paperwork doesn't change that." And she had let it go. The moment passed, and spring turned to summer. Then, in August, Calvin collapsed in the driveway while getting the mail. A heart attack. Sudden. Final. Lorraine rode in the front of the ambulance and left the hospital alone. The days after were a blur of casseroles, flowers, and condolences. She wore black for 2 weeks, cleaned his closet in the 3rd, and sat quietly in the garden on the 4th. She wasn't afraid. She still had the house, the bank accounts, the will in the fireproof box. Calvin had left her everything. He had told her so. It wasn't until she made the appointment with the probate attorney that the story cracked open. She arrived early, holding a folder with Calvin's will inside. She had read it twice. Everything was left to her, clearly and plainly. She sat in a leather chair across from the lawyer, a woman named Susan Kelly, who opened her laptop and pulled up the county records. "Lorraine," she said gently, "I need to show you something." The screen displayed the deed. It listed the current owner of the home, but it wasn't Calvin. It was the Calvin Mayfield Living Trust, established 14 months before his death. And the named beneficiary of that trust was Sylvia Ann Mayfield, Calvin's younger sister. Lorraine blinked. There must be some mistake. Susan shook her head. "The will doesn't apply here. This house, your home, was removed from his estate when he placed it in the trust. The trust controls the asset now." "I'm so sorry." Lorraine heard the words. But her body didn't move. She had known betrayal before small ones. A friend who talked behind her back. A neighbor who spread gossip. But this was different. This was an emotional betrayal carried out through notarized documents, sealed envelopes, and the quiet clicks of a keyboard. She remembered the brown leather folder on his desk, the one she never touched, the one he said was just for taxes. Lorraine's hands were folded in her lap. Her shoulders didn't move. Her mouth opened once, then closed again. Later that night, she made herself a cup of tea she didn't drink. She stood at the sink and stared into the backyard. She thought of every holiday, every storm, every quiet morning spent on that porch. They had built this place with their hands and paid for it with their lives. And now, she was a guest in it. Her chest tightened, but there were no tears. Not yet. Only a ringing in her ears and a dull ache in her knees. She didn't scream. She didn't throw anything. Instead, she went to the hallway closet, pulled out one of Calvin's old sweaters, and sat on the floor, holding it in her arms. It still smelled like cedar and dust. Somewhere in the dark, her voice broke through. If I had asked him last year, would he have told me that night? She did not sleep. What Lorraine had just discovered was not simply a mistake in paperwork. It was elder financial abuse wrapped in politeness and patience, hidden under the weight of trust and marriage. She had lived by the belief that shared years meant shared rights. But trust, it turned out, was not a legal guarantee, and retirement dreams built on silence were far more fragile than she had ever understood. The root of this tragedy was not the trust document itself. It was the silence that surrounded it. Lorraine believed that because she had shared a life, a bed, a mortgage, and decades of loyalty, her name was protected by love. But love is not a legal shield, and silence is not consent. What happened to Lorraine is more than a clerical oversight. It is a form of marital betrayal so carefully masked in routine that even the victim could not feel the wound until the paper was already signed. There were no shouting matches, no threats, just one signature, filed quietly, that changed the course of her life. Calvin had the legal right to create a trust, in most states, including Missouri. Any property titled in one spouse's name alone can be transferred without the knowledge or approval of the other, unless specific joint ownership laws apply. Lorraine's name was never added to the deed. She had assumed that being a wife meant being included. But under law, assumption has no power. The more devastating truth is that this pattern is not rare. Across the United States, many older women experience financial losses in the final years of their marriage, whether through hidden accounts, unspoken loans, or sudden changes to wills and deeds. It's part of a growing phenomenon, often labeled grey divorce separations and financial shifts that happen late in life, when a person is least prepared to rebuild. Lorraine never saw the betrayal coming, and even if Calvin had not died, had he simply filed for divorce and used that trust to protect the home, she would still have had to fight for recognition. Without her name on the title, without a paper trail of contribution, the home might still have been lost. She did nothing wrong, but she also did nothing on paper. That was the difference. Her recovery began not with outrage, but with action. She asked the right questions. She found a probate attorney. She confronted the legal structure, not just the emotional aftermath. What she uncovered was a design built on technicalities, a system where those who know the law can use it to quietly remove others from their own lives. In the end, Lorraine's story is not only about grief, it is about clarity. The clarity to name what happened, the clarity to protect what remains, and the clarity to speak, out loud, for the first time. The words that too many women say, only in the privacy of their thoughts, "I never thought he would do this to me." Because by the time silence is broken, the damage is often already legal, already binding, already irreversible. Lorraine did not try to reclaim the house. She could have fought, perhaps, hired a more aggressive attorney, dug through old receipts to prove her contribution. But what she needed more than bricks and siding was something no court could grant her: the feeling that her life was once again her own. She began with something simple. She closed the joint bank account and opened one in her name only. Then she met with a financial counselor At the county senior centre, they sat for 2 hours in a small conference room with beige carpet and fluorescent lighting. Lorraine brought every document she had left. Together, they created a new file this time, in a blue folder labeled only with her name. She found a modest apartment in Columbia, Missouri, 2 rooms and a small kitchen. It had a window facing a line of trees and just enough light to grow her favorite rosemary plant. She donated most of Calvin's furniture, kept only 1 rocking chair, and bought a second-hand bookshelf for the novels she still read every night, each Tuesday and Thursday. She walked to a legal literacy workshop hosted by the local community college. She learned about estate law, about how trusts operate, about the difference between joint tenancy and sole ownership. It was not just about information, it was about language. Words that once felt like walls became tools. And for the first time in her life, Lorraine began drafting her own will. She also started speaking, quietly, at first, over coffee with a friend from her gardening club, then at her church's women's circle. Eventually, she was invited to share her experience at the very workshop where she had once been a student. She stood behind the lectern, her hand steady, and said the words that still left a heaviness in her chest. I believed that because I was married, I was protected, but the truth is, marriage without paperwork is a risk. Love without signatures means nothing in a probate court. She did not cry. She did not tremble. She told her story as a way to hand someone else a flashlight in the dark. As for Sylvia, Calvin's sister, she eventually sold the house. Lorraine heard it through a neighbor. The final price was well below market value. Lorraine said nothing. She had already moved forward. Now, when she walks through the aisles of the city library, she is known not as someone's widow, but as someone who teaches others how to read between the lines. Her story is no longer just one of loss. It is one of clarity, of reclaiming power after being erased. Because what happened to Lorraine was not a mistake. It was elder financial abuse in its quietest form, hidden behind trust, hidden behind marriage, hidden behind years of believing that silence is safety. And what she did step by step, paper by paper, was not just survival, it was justice. Quiet, undeniable. Hers.